Bear is coming on. Commissioner Jackson.
Hello there.
Hi. Okay, well, we have a quorum, so let me call the meeting to order, and I'm suspecting that there may be a couple of others, few others joining us, and they can get caught up with where we are. So welcome. It's good to see everybody. And as I'm sitting here looking out my window, the days don't get much prettier than this. So I hope everybody's had a chance to get outside for a little bit, or at least maybe after this meeting, you'll get a chance to get outside for a few minutes. As you know from the agenda, the primary focus of our meeting today is in consideration of the consolidated fiscal year 23 operating budget and capital budget that will be presented to the governor and to the General Assembly. So that will take up the bulk of our time. We have a few administrative things to handle before that. And then at the end of those finance presentations, I'll be asking for a vote for us to go into closed session for some administrative proceedings. So with that, Secretary Fielder, let me turn things over to you for your comments.
Thank you.
Could I just remind everybody, when you're not speaking, as I was getting ready to mute myself, when you're not speaking, whether you're on your computer or on your phone, please mute so that we can reduce any feedback.
Okay, thank you. Joining me today are two very valuable members. They raise their hands as I call them. Dr. Peg Dahl and Kim Ford. Raise your hands and say hello. These two staff members have done a continuing outstanding job in our nurse support program, and both believe that they're here today to give us an update and report and statistics. But what we're really here to do today is to celebrate Dr. Peg Dahl's acceptance into the American Fellow Academy of Nursing, which is a national, actually international. Her work has been recognized throughout the United States as a way to have more nurses educated at universities in order for them to teach nursing. So we have two things. First is a certificate of appreciation from the Maryland Higher Education Commission. We, the commissioners of the Maryland Higher Education Commission, applaud Dr. Dahl for being recognized as one of nursing's most accomplished leaders in policy, research, practice, administration, and academia, as one of the individuals selected to be inducted into the 2021 class of fellows. She represents the great state of Maryland along with 37 other states, the District of Columbia, and 18 countries. As a program director and administrator of the Nurse Support Program 2 at the Maryland Higher Education Commission, Dr. Dahl is credited with increasing the educational capacity of nurse educators and nurse faculty in the state, and for enhancing the pool of well-educated and qualified nurses serving Maryland residents. And it goes on, and the easiest way I can explain that, she has demonstrated her personal commitment and passion on a regular basis in terms of expanding the whole nursing field, because when we did the study years ago as to why there was a shortage of nursing, there were enough student applicants, there was enough lab space, but there were not enough those nurses willing to teach nursing because they made more money at the top end of nursing versus the academic side. So in addition to this certificate, which will be handed to her, to you, there's also the governor's citation from Governor Hogan, signed by the governor, lieutenant governor, and the Secretary of State, representing their commitment and appreciation on behalf of the citizens. So with that, I'd just like to recognize Peg and a round of applause. It's never as good as in person, but at this point, that's the best we could do, Peg. We've enjoyed working with her, and she's still here. She's not going anywhere. It's just that we wanted to have this recognized by the commission members. That's all I wanted to comment on. One other quick update is that last week on Friday, the Lieutenant Governor in the governor's reception room met with the presidents of all the community colleges and Dr. Emily Dow and myself to discuss the community college field. So We had a very, very good meeting, but I wanted to let everyone know about that. So with that, back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Secretary Fielder. And Dr. Dow, on behalf of all the commissioners, congratulations. That is a very high honor and well-deserved. So you should be feel very honored and very pleased. Congratulations. We have no public comments today, so I'm simply going to move on to the approval of the minutes. And if I could have a motion to approve, just so I can get the minutes on the floor, then I can see if there are any amendments or corrections. So if and could I also remind everybody, whether you're making a motion as a first motion and the seconder, would you please identify yourself so we can get it correctly recorded in the minutes? So if I could have a motion to approve the minutes, please.
Madam Chair, I so move. Commissioner Boyd.
Thanks, Commissioner Boyd. And a second?
Jim Coleman, second.
Thanks, Commissioner Coleman. Are there any corrections, and we can take the minutes all three together. Are there any corrections, amendments to any of the minutes that you had a chance to review? Okay, if not, I would ask for approval. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand, whichever you'd rather do. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, thank you. The minutes are approved. So let's move on to committee updates. And I don't know, and certainly don't expect that all the committees would have met since our last meeting, but I'm just going to go through each one, and you can tell me whether or not there are any updates. So if we could start with the Education Policy Committee. Commissioner Boyd, do you have anything to report?
Well, I think the major update is that the committee was able to meet through Dr. Dow's initiative with Dr. Ann Kellogg of the Maryland Longitudinal Data System. And that was a very informative meeting that allowed us to have a better understanding of the kind of data that's being collected over time. And by the way, the chairman of that committee is our own Secretary Fielder. It's grown in size since the beginning to a total of 15 governing members of that board. And they're looking into questions of transition of students. But for the Educational Policy Committee, they invited us to ask them questions, understand the data that they have, and either now or in the future. So very informative, and it feels like we're on track to answer some of the questions that come up for that group over time. So we really appreciate Dr. Dow bringing Dr. Kellogg to our attention.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyd. Any questions for Commissioner Boyd or comments? Okay, so let me move on to Commissioner Coleman. Is there anything from the Outreach Grants and Financial Assistance Committee?
Not at this time. I'm waiting to have a conversation with Ms. Thomas, Donna Thomas, who's the director, and after I meet with her, then I will call a meeting with the group, with Commissioner Jackson and the student rep.
Okay, thank you very much. And Finance and Operations Committee, I know that we don't have an official chair yet, but Mr. Newman, anything that you want to report in addition to what we're going to hear about in a few minutes?
Nothing in addition, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Commissioner McDaniels.
Yes, just a brief update. I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Barbara Smertz and Secretary Fielder for providing some focus and background for us to get our committee work underway. The committee is planning to meet twice in November. The first meeting will just be with Dr. Smertz and the commissioners that have volunteered to serve. Commissioner Coleman and Commissioner Serrano are part of the team. And in the near term, we're going to share the most recent annual cultural diversity reports submitted by all public and state-aided independent institutions with the commission members so that they can begin to familiarize themselves with the work of the institutions. And then by January of 2022, the committee will have recommendations for the 2022 Cultural Diversity Report guidelines that will go out to institutions in February. These guidelines provide the annual reporting requirements for the institutions and often prompt other institutional response tied to the Cultural Diversity Report. We also have some MHET staff that have volunteered to assist in the endeavor, along with Dr. Schmertz, Glenda Abney, an education policy analyst, and Bryson Barksdale, an online education analyst. Longer term, the committee will include holding a series of listening sessions with stakeholders across the state. So we're just getting started, but we've got some aggressive plans to follow up on.
Good. Thank you very much, Commissioner McDaniels. And it sounds like you do have a good plan laid out. So thank you for that report. Any questions for Commissioner McDaniels? Okay, thank you. So with that, Mr. Newman, I'm going to hand things over to you to take us through some of the material that was presented to us ahead of time.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the Commission and Mr. Secretary. This afternoon, Dan Schuster and I will be talking about the consolidated operating budget and capital budget recommendations for fiscal 2023. And in so doing, specifically for the operating budget, I just wanted to read this to you just so you sort of understand the Commission's role in looking at the budgets. The consolidated budget is to include a recommendation regarding the appropriate level funding for higher education in order to achieve the goals established in the Maryland State Plan for Post-Secondary Education. And the Commission may comment only on the funding priority of an institution as a whole and may not recommend against budget item approved by the University System of Maryland Board of Regents, the Morgan State Board of Regents, unless the item is clearly inconsistent with the Maryland State Plan for Post-Secondary Education. So we really look at a global, overarching perspective with respect to the budgets. We don't dig into line item detail, and we don't really recommend against anything that we think, unless we think it is clearly inconsistent with the state plan as well as the administration policy or priorities for higher education. We do have the Department of Budget and Management and the Department of Legislative Services who really dig into the details of these budgets very carefully each year. And I would recommend, if you are interested in any of the specifics or any of the details regarding concerns about the budgets, during the legislative session, there is a budget schedule for all of the higher education segments and institutions that are being reviewed that year for budget hearings in the Senate and the House during the legislative sessions each year. So if there is a particular concern, you can pass them forward to Lee Towers and myself, and we'll try to notify you if and when the budget hearings will be occurring. But given that perspective.
Mr. Newman, could I just interrupt for a moment? I assume that you'll take some questions along the way if people need clarification.
Yes,
sure. So I would invite the commissioners to raise any questions that you have.
Yeah. So on page 12 of your commission books, I've listed the three main priorities of the Maryland Post-Secondary Plan for Post-Secondary Education, which is currently in its 5th year. The state plan is being updated, and we will have a new state plan soon, but it is not available yet at this time in the final form. So if you look at state funding for higher education for fiscal 2022, we sort of take a look at the prior year We don't have information on the upcoming year because we don't have it yet, and it's also under executive privilege until the governor and the Department of Budget Management make budget decisions in December for introduction in the annual budget bill in January to the General Assembly. So we're looking back at fiscal 22. The state provided over $2.2 billion in state funds to higher education. Funding to the public four-year institutions, and this is shown on page 13, represents 70% of the funds provided to higher education, and the community colleges represent 18.2%, and the Selinger program for the independent nonprofit institutions under that program was 3.9%. And then there are various funding levels for financial assistance, 5.9% for our state financial assistance programs in the MHEC budget, and then pass-through grants and that type of funding. I always like to highlight that the administration of the Maryland Higher Education Commission is 0.3% of the overall state higher education budget. And I call us the small but mighty MHEC. You know, we have a small staff, we do a lot of work, and we receive 0.3% of the annual higher education budget. And you can see the overall numbers in table 1, and then more detail is provided in the tables on pages 16 through 20 in your commission book. State funding allocations to the public four-year institutions of higher education is compared in relation to the operating funding guidelines. And through these guidelines, funding and performance of each Maryland institution is compared to a set of peer institutions from competitor states, which were identified, I believe it's 10 states, and they're listed on page 13 under the state fund allocations heading, so you know what those competitor states are. And if you look at page 14, you can see the funding guidelines for fiscal 2022, and you can see that overall attainment of the funding guideline recommendations was 64%, with a low of 16% for the UMGC, the University of Maryland Global Campus, because of its special status as primarily an online and off-site institution. It receives a small portion of its revenues from the state appropriation. And then Coppin State University, as one of our HBCUs, has been receiving over 100% of its recommended funding guideline at 117%. And you can see the ranges for the institutions through those guidelines. State funding for St. Mary's College of Maryland, which is not in the funding guidelines, is provided through a statutory formula. And in 2022, fiscal 2022, they received $29.2 million in state funding. The local community colleges received $371.5 million through the CADE formula, as well as educational grants and retirement funding. And Baltimore City Community College, which is actually a state institution, due to its status as receiving state funding with little to no funding from Baltimore City, so it is a state-operated institution, received $39.9 million. And the independent institutions received $88.8 million through the Selinger program. The commission,
Jeff,
yeah.
Can I interrupt you just for a second? I like the fact that you want to change it from Maryland Higher Education to Mighty Higher Education Commission. I'm not sure we can get that through, but we could sure give it a try. If you take a minute for our newest commissioners to explain when you say the CADE formula, what that is.
Yeah. So the CADE formula is the formula that we use to provide state funding, the state funding portion, to the local community colleges, with the exception of Baltimore City Community College, which has its own formula, which I'll also describe. The CADE formula is based upon a percentage of the general funds per full-time equivalent student provided to the public four-year institutions. So it's linked as a segment to the funding that the public four years get. This has helped to remove a lot of the sort of the need to sort of fight for funding from the administration and the General Assembly, because, and the Sellinger program as well for the independent nonprofit is also based upon money that the public 4 years gets. So this way the segment of higher education works more collaboratively and cooperatively than segments you find in other states where they're actually fighting for money from the state budget for community colleges, against the 4 years, against the independents, or whatever other interests they have in the state. So because the funding for the community colleges and the independent institutions are formulas based upon the funding that the public 4 years get, it creates that little less antagonistic type of environment. Also, Baltimore City Community College is based upon money to the public 4 year institutions, but the percent that they get is higher to compensate for the fact that they're not receiving any local appropriation from Baltimore City.
And Mr. Newman, if I can just jump in, and from the time when I was sitting in the president's office, that structure that was set up actually does allow the institutions to speak, at least on these issues, as one voice, because as one sector benefits, the other two sectors benefit also. So it's worked quite well.
Yes. So when you hear the CADE formula, you'll know that. And if anybody's interested, I could send you the details of how it's calculated. Sometimes it's best not to know how sausages and formulas are made, but if you're interested, I'd be very happy to provide the information regarding any of those three formulas.
And it's called, yeah, it's called the CADE formula for Senator Cade. I think some of you would remember him as very outspoken person for the community colleges and very much of an expert on the state budget. So he was the one who came up with this, and it was named for him. And then, of course, unfortunately, he passed away, but we still carry the name.
And because they knew that Commissioner Sellinger was going to be in such high esteem when he became a commission member, they named the formula for him. But actually, Commissioner Sellinger could probably tell you why the Sellinger formula is named as such. So anyway, moving on.
I just had a quick question.
Sure.
Do we know that, like, in March of this year, like the American Rescue Plan from the federal level, my understanding there was some money that was to offset some of the budget cuts that were done at the state level. Do we know how that money is kind of played out into the scheme in terms of how the appropriation money?
I do have data on the federal money that the institutions received, as well as federal money that was provided to MHEC to allocate to community colleges and the independent institutions, and I can provide that if you are interested.
Yeah, can we see that as well?
Sure. A lot of the money was provided directly to the institutions. Institutions had to apply for it, but I do have that data, and I can provide that for you.
And so, was it only the community colleges and the was it not the the 4 year institutions?
All institutions received direct funding directly from the U.S. Department of Education. So MHEC was not responsible for administering that funding. It was given to them. The U.S. Department of Education calculated how much each institution would get and then notified the institutions, and then the institutions had to agree to certain terms with respect to the funding, and then they would receive the funding directly from the federal government.
Okay, great.
There were two portions of GEAR funding that we provided to community colleges, and one smaller portion to the independent institutions that MHEC administered, and I can give you that information as well.
Okay, great. Look forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Okay. But that will not affect fiscal 2023. Because I do not believe any stimulus or that type of money is going to be available in the upcoming fiscal year. So for the state financial aid programs, the Commission received over $134 million in general fund and special fund support for student financial assistance. Maryland state financial aid applications by the deadline of March 1st totaled 136,655 in fiscal 2022. That was a decrease of about 2.62% from the fiscal year 2021. But approximately 9,480 students were placed on the Educational Assistance Grant Program waitlist. So while the demand seemed a little lower, the actual money that we could appropriate, we had to create a wait list. And the average award to students receiving aid through the Educational Assistance Grant Program, which is our major need-based aid program, was about $1,994. The Promise Scholarship for the community colleges, the last dollar scholarship program awarded to students that are enrolled at a community college in either credit-bearing vocational certificate of credit-bearing, vocational certificate or associate degree programs, or a sequence of credit and non-credit courses that leads to licensure or certification, or a registered apprenticeship program, and have unmet need after all of the other aid that they're receiving has been applied. So in fiscal 2022, a total of 4,079 students have an active Promise Scholarship award, and that totals about $13 million, and the average award is about $3,174. Now going to the mighty, small but mighty MHEC. MHEC, like all state agencies, has continued to adjust its operations due to the coronavirus pandemic. We moved, along with all state agencies, from the emergency pandemic telework policy to the normal state telework policy as of July 1st, 2021, when the new fiscal year began. Currently, nearly all staff has been working in a hybrid mode, which is teleworking some days and working in the office on others. We do continue to experience turnover in several positions with the agency. Sorry, Mr. Secretary, I haven't projected your future plans, but when Secretary Fielder began as secretary, we had about 22 vacancies, which was considerable when you consider we only had about 55 full-time positions in the agency. And we got that down very significantly during the first few years, but then when the pandemic hit, things started happening, and now we currently have about 13 vacancies, 11 full-time and 2 contractual. But again, we're working very hard to fill those, and we do have almost everything moving so that we will have about 10 of those vacancies filled between November, by the end of the year. And we're still working on the 3 vacancies that have recently come to be, and I just found out about another one that might be occurring very soon. So when we get a vacancy, we actually try to take immediate action to refill those vacancies, but it usually takes anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks to try to fill them through all the steps we have to go through to, under the current budget system, a vacant position becomes frozen immediately. So we have to request it to be unfrozen. Then we have to get the recruitment material together and put it out there. Hopefully people apply, and then we have to set up the interviews and get through that program. So between unfreezing the positions and getting through all the recruitment and interviewing and offer and hiring, it can go from 4 to 8 weeks. 4 if we're very, very streamlined. But we're working on that. And the Commission received a state appropriation of almost $6.9 million in general funds for agency operations in the fiscal 2022 budget. And we have 60 regular budgeted state positions and 6.35 contractual positions. So you can see that our 11 full-time positions is a decent portion of our workforce, which we're rapidly trying to fill and get people back into those positions. So the recommendation is found on page 15. It is recommended that the Maryland Higher Education Commission adopt that the following funding priorities be used in targeting funding for higher education for fiscal year 2023. First, and these aren't in priority order, but first, funding to support the Maryland Higher Education Commission general administration budget as it continues to implement new programs, changes to existing programs, and examines operations to continue to increase automation of application and management programs. Funding to support new programs of student financial assistance brought forth by the Governor and the General Assembly, and continued support of formula-funded institutions and segments in accordance with the calculation methodologies provided in statute to the greatest extent possible. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Any questions, comments?
Sorry, I asked earlier about the federal dollars that were coming in. Do we have? Is it possible to ask for more data in terms of like the settlement money for the HBCUs? I know there's a substantial amount of money. Is there any way we can find more information about that? In addition to what, obviously the federal money was quite a bit as well. So I was just trying to see. I'm trying to look at the. I don't know if it matters for the MHEC
Yes.
operations, but it would be good to just see the universe of what we're working with in terms of the different universities.
Yes, I believe we can provide that information. If I'm not mistaken, I'll ask our principal counsel. I believe we can share that information now, right? Is she on the line? Jennifer?
She was on the line.
Yeah, I'm here. It's a little bit more specificity as to what you're looking for, Dr. Strano, in terms of the information, the funding levels, or?
I guess for the settlement part, it's just more how the breakdown in terms of universities. I guess there's 4 universities that we're looking at, and just to see what. I mean, I guess in terms of funding level from federal, and then I mean, I guess that applies to every university and college, but it's like for the HBCU settlement to see if there's what the funding levels would be at by university.
Yeah, the settlement tracks precisely what's in the legislation, so we can certainly provide more information from that.
And it also provides the methodology by
Yes.
which the actual allocations will be provided to the HBCUs each year, but it's based upon enrollments and other factors that won't be known until each year prior to when the allocation has to be made. So we can give you the overall, the overall funding, and then the methodology that will show how it's going to be allocated. And we can go from there and see what happens.
Cool. Thank you.
And could I suggest that you share that with all the commissioners, and then that way we all have the same background?
Yes.
Thanks. Anything else? Okay, so Mr. Newman, I think we have a second part of the presentation about the capital budget.
Right. So we're doing the recommendation for the operating budget now, and then Mr. Schuster will present the capital budget and the recommendation for that next.
Okay.
So the recommendation is that the Maryland Higher Education Commission adopt that the following funding priorities be used in targeting funding for higher education for fiscal year 2023. First, funding to support the Maryland Higher Education Commission general administration budget, funding to support new programs of student financial assistance if requested by the Governor and General Assembly, and continued support for the formula-funded institutions and segments in accordance with the calculation methodologies provided in statute to the extent possible.
Okay, thank you for that. And if I could have a motion to put that recommendation on the floor, please.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Boyd, I so move.
Thanks, Commissioner Boyd. Could I have a second?
This is Commissioner McDaniels. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner McDaniels. And any additional questions or comments before we take a vote? Okay, all in favor of the motion that's on the floor, please signify by either raising your hand or saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. The recommendations pass.
And before Dan Schuster begins his presentation, he has provided a lot of detail about the capital budget in the information in your commission books. He won't be digging into all that detail for his presentation, but he did want to provide it so that you can have a good understanding of what is in the capital budget for fiscal 2023, which I think is certainly going to be helpful for you all. And I'll hand it over to Dan for his presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Secretary, members of the Commission. For the record, I'm Dan Schuster. I'm the Capital Finance Analyst here at MHAG. And I'm happy to be here today to talk about the FY23 capital budget for higher education, which is comprised of seven different requests from the different segments. And I'll go through each of those individually with recommendations for each in a moment. First of all, though, I want to talk about the budget in general, which the memo is included in your packets. I believe it starts on page 21 of your commission book if you'd like to follow along. So the capital budget request for higher education in FY23 totaled just over $440 million this year. And if you turn to page 2 of my memo, which is page 22 of the commission book, you can see the breakdown between the different segments. Of course, the university system, Maryland, receives the largest share of that, which is 54%. The next highest is Morgan State at 23%. And then the community college construction grant program, 17%. And the others are much smaller comparatively to those three. And if you turn to page 3, you'll see a history of the authorizations for capital spending in the last 20 years or so. And on that graph, you'll probably notice that in 2021, this past year, there was just about over $470 million that was authorized for capital projects, which was the highest amount ever, and it's actually more than even the request this year. And the reason that came to be was because at budget time this year, there was a bunch of extra money that was available from the federal government, and also the state realized higher revenues than it anticipated, and the governor and the assembly chose to use some of that money to fund some projects that some of them weren't even in the capital improvement plan, the CIP. Some of them were in later years, and so they accelerated those projects in 21. And you may hear talk that there's surplus again expected for the next budget cycle, but whether or not any of that will be used to fund projects outside the CIP, I can't say for sure, but I do know that there's a couple of factors that are, sort of pushing against that idea. And one is that in the construction industry in general, costs are skyrocketing right now. There's a lot of volatility in the market. Certain construction materials are going up exponentially in the last year or so. And so the projects that are planned might wind up being a lot more money than people anticipated when they finally get bid prices together and things like that. So extra money that's available might need to be used just to fund the planned projects. And the other thing is that materials aren't easy to get in a timely manner. And so, for example, steel, if you order it today, it probably would take you sometimes a year before you actually see the materials delivered. And so Therefore, even if you authorized additional funds, you might not be able to spend the money. And so just wanted you to keep that in mind as we're going through these projects and our recommendations, which are basically it's prudent right now to stay within the plan projects in the capital improvement plan, which is the CIP. So with that, we'll go through the individual requests, the 7 different requests. The first one starts on page 3 of my memo, which is page 23, I believe, of the commission book. And that is the Community College Construction Grant Program. I'm starting with this one first because this is the one that MHEC has the most direct involvement in, and me in particular. The colleges submit information to us, and then we submit it to the Department of Budget Management and the Governor's Office on their behalf. And the way this program works is it's a grant program to fund the capital projects at the local community colleges, so the 15 locally owned community colleges. And the state pays for between 50 and 75% of the capital projects. The rest is paid for usually by the county government, but it's a local share. And MAC, which is the Maryland Association of Community Colleges, is also involved in this program because they set the prioritization for each of the projects. And so, in other words, the grant program will fund a certain level, which may be not as much as the request in any one year. And so MAC, through their model, will say which are the priority projects and what order they should be funded. And if you turn to page, I think it is page.
Could I ask you a question? Like, is there like, I might not know very well, but I think like, from my understanding, the lion's share of the capital budget for the community college is given to Howard Community College and Fiscal County College. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say that, no. I mean, it depends year to year. There might be large projects that eat up a share of the budget in any one year, but generally know that all of the community colleges receive funding through this program to meet their needs. And of course, the other part of it too is there's a local match. And so the counties also have to be able to be willing to come to the table in order to receive funding through this program. And so those that do that more often probably will get money more often, right? So that's just the nature of things. If I turn to page,
if I can, one thing on that is the funding for these projects usually moves in about 4 phases. One is the planning phase, where they get a little money to do the architectural work and that kind of thing. Then when you get the construction phase, you usually have 1 or 2 years of high levels of funding. And then when once the bulk of the construction money is given and you get to the final phase, which would be the furniture and equipment phase, which again is probably going to be lower than the construction phase. And it all depends on that cycle where the respective colleges are in receiving the funding and expending the funding for these projects. And annually, the community colleges prioritize the list of funding that they need because they're under one grant program for construction funding. And they work to prioritize their projects each year to be provided to MHEC, and then MHEC submits it to the Department of Budget Management for the consideration of the annual capital budget. So one year you may see 1 or 2 or 3 institutions getting the bulk of the funding because they're in the construction phase of their project. And then that'll change as we move forward.
Yep, that's correct. And so if you look on page 45 of the commission book, which is attachment 1B on my memo, you'll see the requests for FY23 broken down by the college, by the project, and the amounts that they're asking for. And you'll notice the first 8 there are what's called pre-authorized projects, and those are projects that received pre-authorization in last year's budget to get additional funds for construction this year. And that's because they started construction, in 22, and now they're asking for the remaining or the next round of construction funds. And that's what Jeff was just talking about. So you'll see a couple of those on there that are the larger one, like Howard County is, on there for the highest amount this year. And that's because they're constructing a new building on their campus right now. And so obviously that's, I think it's over $90 million a project in total, and they're at 14 million of that in 23. So the first 8 there are the pre-authorized ones. The next 10, there's 8 of them are brand new projects. 2 of them are actually projects that received funding in previous years. We thought we got all the state funding accounted for in previous years, but because they ran into cost increases, now they're coming back and asking for a little bit more money to finish the projects. You'll see that the dotted line there that's on that chart is supposed to represent the line demarcation for the capital improvement plan, which for FY23 is $70 million. And so the projects above that line, if you're funding at $70 million, the projects above that line will get funding, the ones below it may not. However, I'd like to point out DBM does a good job every year of making sure that we analyze the schedules for each of the projects. And so, for example, the pre-authorized projects may not get that exact amount because if they got delayed or things that are affecting their schedules, they may not need that amount in 23. You might be able to push it into 24, and therefore you might be able to fund some of the projects that are lower down on the list because they like to fund at least everybody's top priority project. And and because of the surplus that exists, and because of the request this year was not much beyond the amount in the CIP, it does look like the vast majority of the projects they will be able to fund. Maybe not the last 1 or 2 on the list, but the vast majority of them they should be able to fund this year. And so our recommendation for this program is to fund at the CIP amount of $70 million, and to do that by funding the pre-authorized projects up to the amounts that will be required to maintain their schedules, and to then fund other projects in order of the MAC prioritization list up to the amount of $70 million. The next request to talk about is what's called the Community College Facilities Renewal Grant Program. This is a relatively new program, started in FY20, but actually funds in FY20 and 21 were cut because of the pandemic, and then they were restored in this last budget year, and they will be available again going forward, and we're very happy that they are, because this program is intended to take care of some of the backlog of deferred maintenance at some of the community colleges, fix up some of the buildings. And this program is actually, by statute, it's funded by formula, really. It's so that previous program I talked about, the construction grant program, whatever amount is funded in that program in any 1 year, you take 5% of that, and that's what has to be funded in the facilities renewal program. And then that amount that's funded that year is divvied out into evenly to 8 of the community colleges in the first year, and then the next year the other 8 get the money. And Baltimore City Community College does participate in this program. They don't in the other one, but they do participate in this one. If you look on page 14 of my memo, which is page 34, I believe, of the commission book, you'll see the 8 colleges that are in line to receive money through this program in FY23. And our recommendation is to fund this program at the statutory amount of $3.5 million, which is the amount it would be if the other program is funded at $70 million. So the next request to talk about is Baltimore City Community College. They're requesting 2 projects. They're requesting projects that are over and above what's in the current CIP that the governor has for FY23. And our recommendation is to just continue to fund at the CIP amount, which is to fund their second project, their deferred maintenance project at 1.25 million. And the reason we're recommending it, and the reason the CIP is set up in general that way, there is sort of a acknowledgement that BCCC does need to have some additional funds directed towards it to fix up some of its facilities in the next few years. But the reason the CIP is the way it is not really because the need isn't there or because the budget isn't there, but it's because of the capacity for how many projects they can handle at any one time. And they got a couple of authorized projects right now that they're working through. They did get $4 million in deferred maintenance in FY22. They're getting another $1 million that they have to work through in our FRG program, the Facilities Renewal program. And so I think the reason why the CIP is set that way is because that's how much people feel they can handle this year. And so our recommendation is to stick with that for now. The next request to talk about is the University System of Maryland, which is, of course, the biggest part of the request for the higher education budget. This year, their base request is for 10 projects totaling $237.8 million. And those are all detailed on pages 15 through 19 of my memo, which is pages 35 through 39 of your commission book. I would like to point out also that in addition to their base request of those 10 projects, which are included in the CIP for FY23, they did request a supplemental amount for projects that were authorized by the Assembly in this past year, which were outside of the CIP. And our recommendation, as I said, is going to be to stick with the CIP for now, make sure we get through those projects. There are cost increases. The amounts they're asking are more than what's in the CIP, so we just want to make sure we use the money to fund the planned projects. Next request is Morgan State University. And of course, they are a state institution that operates outside of USM. And they have actually 5 projects that they're requesting funding for in FY23. All 5 are in the CIP, which is quite a substantial amount for one college in any one year. But again, they probably had a backlog of projects that they needed to get funded, and we're now sort of working through that. And so our recommendation is to fund these projects, which are included in the CIP. There's 5 projects totaling over $100 million, $100.7 million. And again, they're all in the CIP. St. Mary's College of Maryland is next. Those are on page 41 of the commission book. They're just asking for 2 small projects, both of which are in the CIP. They total $3.4 million. And then finally, last but not least, is the independent colleges through Maryland Independent College and University Association, MICUA. They have a very successful program where they typically get about $12 million every year authorized by the General Assembly for capital projects. And they have a program where instead of the colleges each coming to the state individually, they go through MICUA, and then MICUA brings forward 2 or 3 each year to take to the state to request funding. And this year they're requesting funding for 3 projects, one at Hood College, one at McDaniel College, and one at Stevenson University. And their request this year totals $11.3 million, and we are recommending approval of that as well. And that concludes my presentation, but I'd be happy to entertain any questions that people have.
Hello, I have a question. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I was just about to type. I was just curious as to if you mentioned this or if this is just knowledge that I do not have. But when a school asks for funding for a particular project, but some and not all are provided, or the state says that, yeah, don't work on that project right now, are they able to find funding elsewhere for their projects, or must it entirely be deferred?
Well, so first of all, I shouldn't say every college, but all the four-year institutions generally have foundations that they go through as well. And the independent colleges, of course, have their own funding streams that they use. The way that the state program works is typically there's a 5-year capital improvement plan that's approved every year. And so you heard me say the CIP, that's what I'm talking about. And generally speaking, first of all, the college has to show that there's a need for that project. And once they do, it's approved and it's put in the CIP in a certain year. And so even if it's not funded necessarily this year, they might have it included, 2 or 3 years from now in the out years of the CIP. And they sort of try to put things in line so that the capital budget in general is, about the same every year. And the colleges will eventually get their money once they've justified the project.
And the state capital, excuse me, and the state capital improvement plan at the state level is for all state agencies,
right,
including the colleges and universities.
And either Mr. Newman or Mr. Schuster, I think it is still true that with the independent sector, that they cannot access that state grant until they have matched it. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. Yep. And usually the match is more than 50%. It's got to be at least 50%, but usually it's much more than that.
Any other questions before we get to the vote on the recommendations?
So I just a little bit confused on the CIP. So is it updated every fiscal year? Is it a 6-year plan, or how does it work?
Correct. And so the Department of Budget Management puts it together. You can see the current CIP, which was presented last year, which covers years FY22 through 27. And every year when the requests are made, they'll update that. And they might move projects around up or back, within the CIP. And obviously new projects get added to the last year of the CIP every year. But that is available on the Department of Budget Management website.
And so does that, going back to the earlier point, in terms of the outside funding, or we can call it outside funding, like the federal dollars or settlement dollars are coming in, does that get taken into account in the CIP?
Are you talking about for the independent colleges?
I'm saying for all colleges, I guess it's the HBCU for the settlement, and then the federal dollars that were coming in from the March legislation. Does that get calculated into the CIP?
Not necessarily. So the CIP is just for state funding, and so in other words, for the projects, if there's a state share associated with it, just the state share is what's in the CIP. The other parts of it are not in the CIP. But generally,
my question is if there's outside funding, if there's requests that are coming in for different maintenance and so forth, and if outside funding is coming in from the federal or government or from a settlement, wouldn't that change the CIP? Would the state contribution, wouldn't that be less than what was previously? It sounds like it's the current CIP plans are what we are proposing, recommending. But if there's outside funding, then why keep it the same?
Correct. And there's lots of different funding streams. There's bond premium funds that's been used for capital projects. A lot of the colleges spend their own reserves on some of these deferred maintenance projects. And every year there's discussions with the universities and DBM about those funding sources and what's available and what they can use or what they can't afford to use this year and why they have to ask for state funding for it. And those conversations happen between the colleges and DBM constantly. And certainly every year that DBM updates its CIP based on those conversations, and the information is supplied, by the colleges and institutions themselves.
Like, so I guess in a sense, the settlement and then the federal dollars that came in March, right? I think that was the CIP. I guess the Department of Planning, did they consider that when they put up the CIP, or that before?
So if you go back to my chart on page 3, that $470 million that was approved in 2021, that is all encompassing, right? That's federal funds, pay-go funds, bond premium funds. A lot of different fund sources go into that, and that's why it was so high last year. Okay, and so there is more money available at the current time, correct? And so that's why additional projects got authorized in 2021, and potentially we could see more of that in the next budget cycle in FY23. And so we'll just have to see how much money does become available. And certainly DBM is looking at all of their resources that are available to see how they're going to fund the capital program. They're going to use other fund sources beyond just GEO bonds, which normally fund the vast majority of the program because of that. And they're actually planning on spending less GEO bonds this year. Because they have more cash on hand that they can use from their reserves. And so all of that comes into play when they're putting the CIP together, for all of these projects.
Okay.
Any other questions? So, Mr. Nguyen and Mr. Schuster, or even Ms. Kedia or Katz, can we put one recommendation forward to approve the capital budgets, or do we need to take it item by item?
I think it could be one consolidated.
Okay, so
Yeah, I agree.
Listed as the way Mr. Schuster presented it.
okay, so Dan, could I just ask you to just quickly, I've been taking notes here, but the CIP 70 million for facilities removal, renewal 3.5 million, BCCC 1.25. Could you just kind of take
Okay,
the various
these are
off so people know what they're voting on?
Sure. So these are all listed on page 1 and 2 of my memo, which is pages 21 and 22 of the commission book. And there's 7 recommendations for the 7 different requests. Recommendation number 1 is for the approval of $7 million to fund the community college construction grant program for FY23. Number 2 is to approve $3.5 million for the community college facilities renewal grant program. Number 3 is $1.25 million for Baltimore City Community College. Number 4 is $237.8 million for the USM request. Number 5 is for Morgan State's request, 5 projects for $100.7 million. 6 is for St. Mary's College in Maryland, 2 projects at a total of $3.4 million. And then finally, make U.S. requests for 3 projects totaling $11.3 million.
Thank you. So could I have a motion to approve all those 7 recommendations?
Commissioner Salinger moves.
Thanks. Commissioner Salinger, could I have a second?
So move, Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. And are there any additional questions or comments before we take a vote? Okay, all in favor of the recommendation on the floor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Aye. Any opposed?
I will abstain on this one. I think the only reason why I kind of feel like I really would like to have more information about like the federal dollars and kind of settlement dollars that are coming in. don't want to. I just feel like it'd be helpful to know that.
Thanks, Commissioner Serrano. I was going to ask for abstentions, so any other abstentions? Okay, thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, is there anything else that any commissioner wants to raise or any comments from Secretary Fielder before I ask for a vote to move into closed session? Okay, so
Yes, I would point out that our next meeting is scheduled for November 17th. I really appreciate everybody's question and attention to the budget matters. It's needless to say, extremely important in a year that there's a little bit more money to do some of the capital projects, and the relief funds are aimed at doing, one-time projects versus, increasing the operating budgets. So when the relief funds end, then there would be a problem at every institution. So we've been watching that also. So with that, thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Secretary Fielder. All right, so we need, I would like us to move into closed session to discuss a pending administrative proceeding, and so Akedia will be joining us at that meeting to brief us. There is a new link that has been sent to you, so once we adjourn, I'd ask you to sign out of this meeting and then go to the new link that was sent.
I just, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure that the record reflects that the reason for requesting a closed session vote is to get legal advice.
Thank you. So do I need to reiterate that somewhere, or are we covered there?
I think you're covered.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Fielder, were you going to say something?
No, just goodbye. Stay well.
Okay. So if I could have a vote to move into closed session, if I could have a motion for that. And we do need to do this by name. We'll do roll call on this. So if someone would please make the motion.
This is Commissioner McDaniels. I move that we go into closed session to get legal advice.
Thank you, Commissioner McDaniel, for being very explicit about that. Could I have a second, please?
Second, Commissioner Ray. I would like to second Commissioner McDaniel.
Commissioner Serrano, was that? Thank you. So can somebody do the roll call? Or
Yep, I can do that. Commissioner Boyd?
you're muted, Commissioner Boyd. Commissioner Boyd, you're muted.
Yes, I so move.
Commissioner Jackson?
She's muted too.
Yes, I so move.
Commissioner Barole, are you here?
I don't think so.
Commissioner Coleman?
I so move.
Commissioner McDaniels?
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Commissioner Sellinger?
Yes.
Commissioner Brown, I see here. No, okay. Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Commissioner Serrano?
Yes.
And Commissioner Adekoya?
Yes.
Okay, so the motion carries. I would now entertain a quick motion to adjourn. Whoever would like to make it, or I'll just adjourn us ourselves if that's all right with everybody. So I'm going to suggest that we are adjourned and moving into closed session. I'll close out of this meeting, and please connect back in with the new link that Soma sent to us. And I'll see you all in a few minutes.
Okay.